And then moving on briefly to the August lunar eclipse in Pisces, given what you were saying about Uranus and Sedna, what I thought was so interesting there is, of course, that we get a mutable T square with Uranus and Sedna in Gemini,
Yeah.
and then the Sun and the Moon again in Virgo and Pisces.
Mm.
So what I thought was interesting there is that it picks up a couple of things that happen in Minneapolis, or that have sort of come up in
Mm.
Minneapolis. The first is that it takes place in the Human Design Gates 59 and 55, which are all about profound connection and altruism. So this generosity of spirit, but in a collective sense, which we did see so strongly, as you said, in
Yeah.
Minneapolis, where you saw communities really looking out for each other, neighbors looking
Mhm.
out for each other. And that's such a wonderful counter to this sense of isolation and this kind of disconnection epidemic that's been so pronounced over the last few years, due to sort of things like social media. So
Yeah.
it's really bringing people together. So this is the upside. And then the other thing, of course, is that if you look at the Vandenberg Saros series, because
Uh-huh.
Bernadette Brady's ones only really work with the solar eclipses, there, if you have a look, it's part of the 138 Vandenberg Saros series, which links back to eclipses in 2008 and 2013.
Mhm.
So again, there's this strong tie to 2008 and the global financial crisis,
Mhm.
which I do think we're seeing, for example, in the rise of populism around the world. I think a lot of that can be linked back to what happened during the global financial crisis. I thought it was so interesting that recently Michael Lewis did a retrospective of the Big Short. He did
Yes.
a
Yeah.
podcast series. I don't know if you heard that,
Yes. Yeah.
where they were kind of going back and they were looking at what's happened since then and so on. And I mean, one of the things that really struck me was that he really makes the case, talking to other experts, that what this showed was that there was one rule for the 99% and another rule for the 1%.
Yes.
And that sparked movements like Occupy. And I think it has led to what we're seeing with Uranus Sedna, particularly Sedna. I think since we spoke last time, I interviewed an astrologer in Portland
Mhm.
who is working quite a lot with Sedna, because, I was very interested. I was quite intrigued after we spoke. I wanted to know more about what other astrologers were finding. And one of the things that she said she found was, aside from the obvious link to things like abuse, which we've seen with, for example, the Jeffrey Epstein victims, she also saw a very strong link to social justice movements and to people who are kind of activists in that area. And of course, Occupy and movements similar to it, which have now moved into political movements like, say, the Green Party and
Mhm.
so on, I think are starting to show themselves through this Uranus Sedna combination. So I think we seem to be at a really interesting time politically, and not just locally, but globally, where, as you say, things are sort of coming to light and things are being revealed that maybe were always there below the surface, but then people like Trump actually say the quiet part out loud. And it does seem to spark something in people. It almost sets off that anger that's been kind of boiling below the surface, which we're now seeing, kind of erupt through the Mars stuff, you know?
I think you're absolutely right about this. And I mean, I'm very concerned about August, full stop.